All right, let's journey back to 1939. We're going to talk about the one event that really lit the fuse on the most destructive conflict humanity has ever seen, the invasion of Poland. And you got to understand, this wasn't just a battle. This was the moment the whole world just tipped right over the edge into all-out war. So, here's the date you need to remember, September 1st, 1939. Early that morning, German forces pour across the Polish border, and just a few weeks later, the Soviet Union invades from the other side, from the east. That was it. The Second World War had officially begun. But you know, this explosion of violence, it didn't just happen out of the blue. To really get it, we need to rewind and look at the final, frantic months leading up to the invasion. The political chessboard, it was already set, long before a single shot was fired. And wow, the escalation in 1939 was just so rapid. It was relentless. I mean, look at this. In March, you got Britain and France promising to protect Poland. Just a month later, Hitler basically rips up a non-aggression pact. But the real bombshell, the move that changed everything, dropped in August. That Nazi-Soviet pact, it was this incredibly cynical deal that made a massive war pretty much inevitable. And here's the thing you absolutely have to grasp. All the public excuses, the talk about the city of Danzig and its status, that was all just a smokescreen. Behind closed doors, Hitler was crystal clear about his real intentions. This was about conquest. It was about securing what he called Lebensraum, or living space, for Germany. That was the real prize. And this pact, this is the document that sealed Poland's fate. On the surface, it looked like a simple non-aggression treaty. We won't attack you, you don't attack us. But secretly, and this is the crazy part, these two bitter ideological enemies had made a deal to literally carve up Eastern Europe between themselves. With the Soviets on the sidelines, Hitler now had a completely free hand to go after Poland. Okay, so the political stage is set for war, but what did the actual fight look like on the ground? Well, to put it mildly, it was a total David versus Goliath situation, except this time, there was no fairy tale ending. I mean, just look at these numbers. They really do speak for themselves. Germany had a massive, overwhelming advantage in soldiers, in artillery, in aircraft, just about everywhere. But the most critical gap, the one that would truly define this whole campaign, was in tanks and armored forces. And it wasn't just about having more tanks. It was about the quality and how they planned to use them. Germany rolled out over 2,000 modern tanks, all grouped together in these dedicated panzer divisions. This was the birth of what we now call Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, a totally new and terrifying way to fight. Poland, on the other hand, they had just a tiny fraction of that kind of modern armor. Most of what they had was either outdated or these super light tankettes. That gap, both in technology and strategy, it was massive, absolutely critical. So with this ridiculously overwhelming force, what was the German plan? How were they going to attack? Well, it wasn't just a simple invasion plan. It was a strategy designed for total annihilation. A giant three-pronged pincer movement with one goal: destroy the entire Polish army in one single decisive campaign. The codename was Fallweiss, or Case White, and the plan itself was just brutally effective. The idea was for German armies to strike all at once from three directions: from Silesia in the south, from the main German border in the west, and from East Prussia up in the north. The whole point was to trap the main body of the Polish army before they even had a chance to fall back. And it all kicked off with these devastating air raids. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, was arguably the best in the world at the time. They took control of the skies so fast, within like 48 hours. They were bombing airfields, yeah, but also shattering communication lines and even terrorizing civilians. This completely crippled Poland's ability to coordinate any kind of effective defense. And then came the knockout punch, the final fatal blow. On September 17th, just as the Polish army was already reeling from the German attack, the Soviet Red Army invades from the east. Their official excuse was a total lie, something about protecting minorities, but we know what it really was. This was that secret pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, kicking into action. And just like that, Poland was trapped, completely caught between two of the world's most powerful armies. Their whole defense plan, which was basically to fall back to the east and hold out for help from the Allies, well, that plan was now completely useless. There was literally nowhere left to run. The whole campaign was over in just a little more than a month. But for Poland and its people, the end of the fighting, that was just the beginning of a long, horrific nightmare. Just let this number sink in. Roughly 675,000. That's how many Polish soldiers were captured by the time it was all over on October 6th. It's a staggering figure. It represents the almost total destruction of an entire country's army in just 5 weeks. And just like they'd secretly agreed, the invaders divided up the country. Germany just straight up annexed the western parts, the Soviet Union absorbed the east, and that central chunk, that became a German-controlled territory called the General Government. For the fourth time in its history, Poland was literally wiped off the map. It's so important to remember this wasn't just a conventional military campaign. Right from day one, German forces were targeting civilians. They were bombing columns of refugees on the roads, committing massacres. This was a war of annihilation. It was a terrifying preview of the kind of brutality that was about to swallow all of Europe.
Now, like a lot of huge historical events, the invasion of Poland is surrounded by myths. These dramatic stories that get told over and over, but often they kind of hide what really happened. So let's tackle a couple of the most famous ones, shall we?
Okay, this one is probably the most famous image from the entire campaign. Brave, but supposedly foolish, Polish cavalry charging headfirst into German tanks with lances is a really powerful image, right? But is it actually true? The short answer is no. It's a propaganda myth. It was cooked up by German and Italian war correspondents and then just blasted out by propaganda machines. The reality is, Polish cavalry units were basically mobile infantry. They rode horses to get around fast, but they fought on foot. The famous charge that the story comes from actually happened, but it was against German infantry. And it was successful. It was only after they scattered the infantry that the cavalry got ambushed by German armored cars. From that one incident, the whole myth of lances against tanks was born. All right, here's another one you hear all the time. The idea that the Luftwaffe just wiped out the entire Polish Air Force on the ground on the very first day. A quick, decisive knockout blow before they even had a chance to fight back. Yeah, that's also totally false. The Polish commanders were smart. They anticipated the attack. And before the invasion even started, they moved all their combat planes away from the big, obvious bases to secret, camouflaged airfields out in the countryside. The Polish Air Force fought on and fought valiantly for 2 full weeks against absolutely impossible odds. They were way more resilient than the myths would have you believe. And that brings us to our final question to chew on. Britain and France did declare war on Germany on September 3rd, but they didn't really provide any meaningful help to Poland on the ground. So, with the country completely crushed between these two massive dictatorships and its allies unable to help, was there any hope left for peace? Or had the spark that was lit in Poland already started a fire that was simply destined to consume the entire world?